Thanks so much for speaking with me, John, about your CX report. I'm super excited to talk to you today about this momentous occasion.
Thanks, Barbara. Glad to be here with you.
The first question I have for you is what does it mean exactly when you say someone knows how to speak machine?
Well, knowing how to speak machine doesn't mean knowing how to program. I mean, that's a good thing, of course, but it's really understanding how the internet works and how much change has happened over the last few decades. Something called Moore's Law has accelerated time such that change didn't happen linearly, it happened exponentially. And because of it, those who speak machine, those who understand how the internet works or how the cloud really works, it's not really a cloud, it's actually all around us, that's really advantage them. And so, how to speak machine is about being able to speak that language in the context of your business, understanding that how products are made has fundamentally changed because the material itself has changed.
How and where did you first learn to speak machine? And has that language evolved over time?
I feel lucky that I know how to speak machine. If it wasn't for the civil rights movement, I probably would never have come into contact with a computer. I grew up in the part of Seattle that was primarily African American and Samoan American. And in the 70s, due to the civil rights movement of the 60s, Seattle schools had mandatory desegregation, which meant that I was bused across city to the nice part of Seattle, where they had much better books, nicer schools, and also that's where I came into contact with a computer. I think back, if I didn't have that opportunity, I would not be where I am today.
What is the risk to businesses or leaders who never learn to speak machine?
So companies that find themselves behind because they don't speak machine, it's really not their fault. If you began speaking machine, like being close to computers in the 70s and 80s, and you kept up with it year over year, it is much easier than starting right now. It is so complex. I feel very lucky to have started early. And if you're a company that's just discovered that there's companies like Amazon, et cetera, taking over your world, where maybe 10 years you thought, they just sell books. I know I sell fruit, or I sell meat, or I sell toy cars. They'll never be in my space. It happened so quickly. Remember, not linear speed, but exponential speed. It happened like that. And so businesses today, when they know how to speak machine, they can at least be competitive. What is that, like crawl and walk, etc.? So a lot of companies are learning how to crawl and walk, and they'll have to run really quickly. Otherwise, they're going to get lapped by all the big tech companies.
Why did you shift from creating the design and tech report over the past 5 years to launching the CX report for the first time this year?
Well, the design and tech reports began when I was in the venture capital space at Kleiner Perkins. Thank you, Kleiner. Taught me so much about the venture capital startup ecosystem of the world. And the thing I realized is that design and tech were coming together, and therefore there was a need for some kind of report to pull it together. Now, 5 years later, design is a given. People know that you have to have a good experience to make a difference. And I've been looking at the customer experience space, the CX space, the marketing and product space, and wondering, is it time to have instead the CX report, where the C stands for computational experience instead, to get us to focus on speaking machine as the big factor that makes a difference.
A piece of artwork that you commissioned about inequality appears in the report, and it seems particularly relevant to our times. Can you describe the artwork in the context of what's going on in the world right now?
So the thing behind the design and tech reports is it made me connect to so many kinds of people and so many kinds of thinking. People reached out to me from all over the world wanting to participate and reshape what I was saying. I've said so many things incorrectly, but luckily, because of the internet, I get feedback, really fast feedback. And the thing I caught in year 2 of the report specifically was about how exclusive the world of tech and startup was, and how we needed to speak more inclusively. That's where I became in touch with the work of Kat Holmes, who at the time was at Microsoft leading inclusive design. That's how I became into touch with how many terrible articles there are out there about how many times a big technology company launched some service that had terribly hurtful impact because oftentimes the people on the teams didn't represent the entire consumer base and they really made terrible mistakes. And so, if anything, the design and tech reports began making me think about a more inclusive world. And then this word equity kept coming to the front. And I was like, what is this word? Like, how do I understand this better? And then what happened was Tony Ruth is someone that I admire. He has this Tumblr called Business Town. I'm a big Richard Scarry fan. And he's a wonderful thinker. And I asked him, could he take apart this idea of equity, equality, injustice? And he came back with a series of images that I just shared with me yesterday about how it's been seen like 16 million times now because it's being spread right now today on social, because it's a great way to help anyone understand why is the world like this, but what do we have to do? We have to move from injustice to justice.
In your infinite marketing and product loop, after a person has shifted from being a buyer to a customer, what are some of the biggest risks that would cause a business to lose that customer?
First of all, the thing about the word customer experience or the words is it's confusing because if you're in the government sector, you don't think of people as customers. They are constituents, citizens in some cases, but constituents because sometimes they're non-citizens in a country as well, who are technically customers, but they're not business customers. They are people who are making the service work and you are responsible to them. And then there is, in the healthcare industry, you don't call people customers. They are patients. You can call this also in the higher education space. You don't call students customers. So if anything, the customer experience word always struck me as something to sort of take apart. And in the process, it became clear that there are two kinds of experiences that had to be highlighted. They're called many things by different parties. The one that I liked best was there's a buyer experience that's attracting you to sort of buy the thing, sign up. And then there is the customer experience where you've signed up and you bought the thing and you're like, I want to get value out of it. And there's, of course, this delicious point where the buyer becomes a customer, they convert. But then once they're there as a customer, and if the product or service is something that isn't just like something you eat the same day, but you experience like for more than a day, maybe a few years, that's where customer lifetime value sort of plays as the key metric to judge whether or not the experience is good or not. That is hard to understand if you're living in a marketing world of wanting to kind of pull them in. Because oftentimes in marketing, all you can do is talk about how to come by. And so a lot of marketers, I saw frustration wanting to be in the customer loop because that's where you can retain the customer. Meanwhile, in tech, we have the product management loop that's living here, building the product, engineers, working agile. And in many senses, they just want to build the product and they want to improve the product. And there's so much just debt in the product that they have to sustain it. So in many senses, who's in charge of these loops becomes confusing. So any business that is moving towards understanding how to run their customer experience has to work carefully with how the marketing experience overlaps and sometimes subsumes everything. That's what's hard. It's the organizational piece of customer experience, buyer experience, that is difficult for any organization at scale. That's difficult for any organization at scale, not hard for a startup where you can all be in the same room or I guess in the same Zoom room or the same 6-person Zoom head room. But in a big company, it's very hard to connect all dots and keep everyone on the same page. It's almost impossible.
You create a Kardashev scale based on the sci-fi writer Nikolai Kardashev. You say most businesses are currently at Kardashev 3, or the galactic civilization. What would it take for those businesses to make the leap to Kardashev 4, the universal civilization?
So one thing I noticed is it's hard to understand digital transformation versus digital business transformation. Digital transformation can be as simple as I got ready for Y2K and I'm done. It's like the year 2000 came, phew, I can go back and have my sandwich, my coffee, thank you very much. But digital business transformation is actually having a material impact on the financial performance of the company. It could be cost saving, but ideally it's generating new revenue. That's much better, right? That's digital business transformation. That's the definition forwarded by Forrester, I know. But what I do believe is that there's no way to describe what the scale is. There's all kind of indices out there that are much better than what I what I prescribe, which is the Kardashev scale, used for different reasons in the sci-fi universe. By the way, I am Star Trek and also Star Wars sort of compliant, so we're good there. But Kardashev seemed to make sense. And so Kardashev 1 is a company that's sort of just coming online and discovering that the internet's there. That most companies aren't there anymore. Kardashev 2 is a company that's been told, hey, we have to do something on the internet. Maybe the business is coming. This is the 90s. And then Kardashev 3 is, whoa, there's this whole social world of everything is interconnected and supply chains have IoT in them. And I've got to be a contemporary digital business. Then there's Kardashev 4, which is the big tech companies, which are a totally different class of companies that can basically connect all dots with data. And they're very different from a Kardashev 3 company. How do you get from a Kardashev 3 to Kardashev 4? That's why in the report this year, I had the opportunity to highlight the work of my colleague at Publicis Sapient, Max Kirby, on customer data platforms. And it's a really simple idea that wasn't obvious to me, which was how if you're an established organization, your IT has been built over a few decades with different parts, different people who came in, left, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's kind of like all duct taped together. And so it's very hard to share records between different systems. Whereas in a CDP world, what happens is you clear that out and you sort of like have a central source that everything reports into. Therefore, all data gets shared at the same time. You could call this how any startup works, like from day one. You can call it how a company like Google gets to operate. But many companies have their data in different silos, and the systems don't talk to each other. So a CDP lets you focus the data. And then with that data, what you can do is you can make better experiences, better buyer experiences, better customer experiences, because the data can be pulled from the CDP. It can generate experiences relevant to you. And then it can go off and if it's done the right thing with you, it can collect data from you with your permission and put it back into the CDP. And therefore, when you come back, it can over-deliver the next time you come. And that's a great experience.
Do you lie awake at night worried about Kardashev 5, the singularity, John?
The nice thing about the Kardashev scale, it's sort of science fiction-y. And so things get worse as you get to the future, which isn't science fiction authors' intent, of course, but they are always cautionary tales. And Kardashev 5 is essentially the singularity when the AIs take over. If you've ever seen the Matrix movies, it's where Neo's plugged into this sort of artificial battery of human beings, and we don't control the machines, they control us. Sort of dark science fiction. But I do lie awake thinking about how many of the biases in our society can easily be automated, meaning that the bad decisions we made in the past can go into AIs, and AIs can run 24/7. They never get tired, and they can automate a lot of bad things. Like just a few years ago, there was a study that showed that there was a system designed to sentence people, court system, kind of like automatic judge. And what this system did is it sourced data from past rulings. And of course, it would penalize someone who came from a poor neighborhood, like a zip code where there are more disadvantaged people. And what happens is now the AI automatically assumes that's your zip code, you came from it, therefore you must be guilty. Those are examples of how so many bad decisions we're making in society today get automated. That's scary if Kardashev 5 becomes that. And that's why so many companies today have people, just a few people in their companies who are raising their hand and saying, I think we have to change this, folks. I think we have to. We definitely have to.
This is called the CX report, and you're the Chief Experience Officer at Publicis Sapient. What is the difference between UX and CX?
So the CX report has a couple pages on trying to disambiguate CX versus UX. It isn't CX versus UX. It's UX is a part of CX. It's a part of the customer experience. It's also a part of the buyer experience. So in the buyer experience, you're doing a lot of UX. Very sophisticated systems being designed to tell you to come on by, literally. And then In the customer experience, it's mainly UX. It's not trying to get you to buy more things, but actually we do like to upsell, of course. But this has tons of UX. So, but it's UX as part of the buyer experience, the customer experience, the whole experience. So I like that definition. Again, there are many people who disagree. Hashtag internet.
How did Italo Calvino and David Bowie inspire this CX report? Do artists speak machine as well as or even better than most people?
Well, I love the work of Italo Calvino and especially David Bowie. Italo Calvino for having some serious abstract thoughts about how the future would become. His book, Six Memos for the Next Millennium, is fantastic. It's where a lot of our lead philosophy of Publisapient came from. Lightness is a factor in lead, L, and also in Italo Calvino's Six Memos. David Bowie is the artist who I hope you've heard of. I wasn't a big fan of his. I didn't know his music that much until he passed away, and then I began to like internet search like everything he did, and wow, I'm a fan. That's why he's back there on my wall here to keep him top of mind. Because in the 1990s, he really called how the internet would someday become something amazing and terrifying, and that inspired my book, How to Speak Machine, actually. And also, David Bowie stood for anti-racism. He's someone who called out on MTV the need to have more people who are Black represented in the videos. This wasn't happening. And he was on MTV itself, criticizing the top VJ at the time. So David Bowie, I admire him for so many things, for understanding computation, but also standing up against racism. I always look to artists because they are essentially activists of the future history. They have to be unafraid to say things that make no sense. And in many senses, it's when society listens to them that we can often move forward versus be stuck in the past. If we think about digital transformation or digital business transformation, it all lives in the context of digital culture transformation. And I think we look to artists to be able to move us forward in that way. And I'm lucky to have been able to learn from them for so many years in my career. So I definitely invite you to all understand the power of art. The power of art is about not solving a problem. It's about asking a question about the problem. And oftentimes that's what humanity has to do more than just try to solve it. As my dear friend, artist Jesse Scheffrin always says, by the time you've come to the perfect solution, the problem has already changed. So look at the problem.
And finally, what is your theory about the slowness of digital transformation and the reality of existing power structures and disparities in gender pay?
Digital transformation is hard to do because the organization is built a certain way to be optimized. It's also quite brittle because it's so optimized. Therefore, don't touch anything or it might break becomes a kind of heuristic in any organization at any scale. Therefore, to transform at the speed of Moore's law, not this, but this, is essentially physically impossible for any organization. That's why I've been wondering, are there other reasons why it's slow, and can we fix them? If you look at the gender pay gap as data, where you can just see that in a situation where there is a man and woman having a family, you look at the graph about the man's pay after birth versus the woman's pay after birth, it's striking because the woman's pay potential drops dramatically and it never recovers and catches up to the man's. What does this mean? It means that there's a lot of potential pent up in a lot of the amazing women out there that I don't think organizations give people a chance or compensate them for being able to achieve at the level that maybe a man who's been at the twilight part of their career doesn't actually want to risk it. I think that's the reason why we have a lot of slowdown in transformation, because we have those who are like, I got to make it to the end, and we have people who go like, hey, I could actually cover that gap if you just pay me more to do it, because I have the energy and the will to take on the extra risk. I think that gap is something we don't talk about enough, and that's why in the report I put it in the end. Thanks for noticing it, Barbara.
Thank you so much for speaking with me, John. It's really been a pleasure.
Barbara, I can't imagine a better companion to have on a Sunday in my messy video studio. Have a great day too. Bye bye.